So a little bit of theory on JavaScript control statements. So these control statements basically govern the execution flow of the program. So what do I mean by this? So as you can see on the screen, in the blue code, typically this is what happens. Let's say we have the JavaScript code inside our script tag. Okay, so this is our script tag. What happens is the execution starts from line number 1, that is code statement 1, and then it moves on to the line number 2, then line number 3, and so on and so forth. So this is how the basic execution flow goes. However, in real time or in real world scenarios, this entire flow is not as simple as in this case. Okay, it is not going to be like a linear way in which the code is going to flow in one direction. So this is where the control statements come into picture, and they basically govern how the flow of the program is going to be and how the code statements are going to be executed one after another. So why do we need these control statements? Now let's say you have your program and you are running your program. So your JavaScript code is running, and let's say you are on line number 3. Okay, your program has reached line number 3, and now what is happening is you want to perform this statement, that is whatever instruction is there in this statement, 100 times. Okay, let's say you want to perform this one single statement, you have to perform 100 times. So in that case, are you going to copy paste this statement 100 different times? No, right? It doesn't seem logical, or it's totally useless, right? And it is unnecessary work, right? So what will you do in that case? So this is where that control statement comes into picture, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But let's take another case. So let's say at line number 5, you have to decide whether an integer is an even number or an odd number. Okay, so let's say at this statement you have a variable and you are storing some value over here. Let's say it is 5, and you have to make a decision whether this variable is an even number or an odd number, right? So in that case, two cases can happen. Either it is odd or it is even, right? So this means that there are two different branches, and depending upon what the result is, you can print or notify that it is an odd number or an even number, right? So there are two different ways in which it can go. So this is where that branching is happening. So again, this is another example of flow control or control statements in JavaScript. So in very basic terms, this is why we actually need control statements, so that we can perform certain activities n number of times, or we can make certain decision making kind of scenarios wherein we can use these control statements. Now in JavaScript, we basically have two different types of control statements depending upon what activity or what type of flow control we are going to be performing. So we have number 1, that is conditional control statements, and number 2, that is looping or iterative control statements. Now we have a third type which is not really having any type, but it assists in these control statements. So we use these statements, that is the break statement and the continue statement. So conditional statements, as the name suggests, are used when we have to make a particular decision or you have different conditions. Okay, so we have if else statements and we have switch case. So this is number 1, this is number 2. So we have two different types of conditional control statements. And then in looping or iterative control statements, as the name suggests, if you want to perform an activity n number of times, instead of copy pasting that statement or that code n number of times, we use loops. Okay, so loops are basically piece of code which performs the same activity n number of times with your particular conditions. So we have for loop, we have while loop, we have do while loop, and then we have a different kind of for in loop in JavaScript which basically works with objects. Of course, we will be looking at each of these different control statements individually in further videos, and we'll also see the code and examples. So this was just a very quick short theory video on control statements and why we need control statements. Okay, we saw what are control statements and we saw the different types of control statements, and we took a theoretical approach. So if you have missed that video, you can check it out in this playlist. But in this tutorial, we're going to be seeing 3 different programs based on if-else control statements. So let's just quickly get into the topic and open up your Visual Studio Code or any text editor that you're using. And as you can see, I've already opened up mine, and I also have opened up the Chrome browser, and we are live. So anything that I change over here is immediately visible in the output. So that's that live server plugin that is active. And as you can see on the screen, these are the 3 different questions that we are going to be writing program for. So let me just read it out quickly. So the first question is find whether a number is even or odd. Second is find if a number is positive, negative or 0. And the third one is find if a number is positive and even. So these are 3 different variants of if-else control statements, and we'll see the different types. So let's start off with the first one, that is find whether a number is even or odd. Okay, so as you can see on this line, I have created a variable where x equals to 6. Now for simplicity purpose, I'm not taking values from user because we still have to understand what is DOM manipulations and how to take values from text box. We still haven't reached that level. So as of now, I'm just hard coding the values, that is, I'm directly giving values in the code. So I have a variable x who's storing a value of 6 over here, as you can see. And now we're going to do if else control statements. So this if else control statements helps us determine a particular condition. So what is the condition in question number 1? We have to find out whether the number is even or odd. So this is how the syntax goes. You have to write if, that's the syntax. So that's the keyword, and then opening and closing round brackets, and inside that you have to say x mod 2 equal to 0, then opening and closing curly braces. So this is that if block, and I'll explain to you what this condition is. So what we are doing is we are checking whether the modulus operation performed with the variable x is giving us a result of 0. Now we know that even numbers when divided by 2 will always give us the result of 0, right? That is, the remainder is going to be 0. Let's say 6, 8, 10, 12, 16, 20, any number that is even, if we divide by 2, the remainder is going to be 0. Now the modulus operator, so this is that modulus sign, always gives us the remainder. So that is what we are checking. So we are saying if this variable x is taken and if we perform a modulus operation with 2, and if it results in 0, obviously it is going to be even number, right? So here what I'm going to write is document.write in the opening and closing round brackets. The text that I'm going to write is even number. So in fact, as you can see, immediately the output is also being shown over here. Let me just put it in h1 tag. In fact, I'll do it in h3. And the reason why immediately we got even number as the output is because yes, we can see that this variable is even, and that's why this if block got executed. So what if this variable was not even? Let me just change it to 3. So there you go, you cannot see any output now. But we also have to find out for the odd side, right? We also need to find out whether the number is odd also. So in this case, simply I can say else, and I'm just going to copy this entire statement. I forgot to give a semicolon, and here I'm going to say odd number. So now you can see we are getting the output of odd number over here. If I change this value to 2 again, we'll get even number. So this is the if else control statements. So either the if block is going to be executed or the else block is going to be executed depending upon what the condition is. Now note that you can always exclude else block, so we don't need to have it. So if you have only one condition to check for, that is only if you want to check for even numbers, then you can do it in if block itself, right? But if you are checking for multiple conditions, then you can have if, and else. So that else if part we'll see in a minute. But you cannot have an else block without if block, okay? So that is not valid. You can see that immediately we are getting an error. Okay, so this was the first program. Now let's actually get to the second program quickly. And it's just a simple modification in the first program itself. So what the second program is saying is we need to find out whether number is positive, negative or 0. So now let's say our variable is x equals to 2 as of now. What we have to check in the if block, we'll say if x greater than 0, I'm going to say it is a positive number. So these are those comparison operators we've talked about in the operators video, right? So these are the comparison operators which help us in performing the comparison. Now we also have to check for negative numbers. So I'm going to say else if, again opening and closing round brackets. So this is how else if block goes. I'm going to say x less than 0, and inside this I'm going to write negative. So if x value is less than 0, it's going to be negative. Let's change the value over here. I'm going to say -1, and you can see immediately we got the value of negative. So lastly, we also have to check for 0, right? So this is where the last else block can be used. I'm going to say number is neither positive nor negative. So if I make the x value as 0, let's see what we get. So there you go, we got the output, number is neither positive nor negative. So here we had 3 different conditions. That's why we used 3 different blocks. We used if block, we used else if block, and we also used else block. So this is how you use else if block. Now you can have n number of conditions and then just the else if blocks will be increased, right? So if you want to check for one more condition, you just need to add one more else if block. So this was program number 2. Let's quickly jump to program number 3, that is find if a number is positive and even. So we have 2 conditions, but they are linked with each other with the AND clause, which means that we need to check a number which is positive as well as even, okay? And not just a positive number. So let's see how that goes. So let's say our number is 5. So in the if block, what I can do is I can have nested if else blocks, which means first I can check whether the number is positive. So this condition checks for that, right? So if x greater than 0, which means that it is going to be a positive number, but I also need to check for even number, right? So inside this if block, I can say if x mod 2 equal to 0, which means that it is also an even number, and I can again print even number. And inside the bigger if, that is this if block, I can also have else block. So this else block will be for this inner if block. Okay, so here I can say number is positive but it is odd. Correct, right? Because you can see our number is positive but it is odd. So first I'm checking whether the number is positive or not in this larger if. Since it is positive, this internal block is executed, otherwise it would be excluded. So inside this, first I'm printing positive. Yes, we have our positive number, but we are checking for the next condition, which is if x mod 2 equal to 0, which means is it an even number or not. If not, then the internal else block is going to be executed and it is going to say number is positive but it is odd. Now for this outer if, I can also have a else block wherein I can say number is negative. So if I had -5 over here, directly we would have got number is negative. So I hope you are getting how to use if, and else control statements, and you can see that we saw 3 different variants and 3 different versions of how you can use them. Now one last variation that you could have done in the last program, that is question number 3, is instead of using nested if else, we can have both conditions in the first if itself. So let me just show you how that works. So this is where we can use the logical operators, and the logical operator to be used over here is AND, because we need to find if the number is positive and even, right? So first condition is going to check for x greater than 0. We can combine an AND clause over here, or AND operator. This is a logical operator which we've seen in the operators video. So I'm going to say AND x mod 2 equal to 0. So this is that condition for even or odd, and this is the condition for positive, right? So now I can say even and positive number. So in one single if statement, I'm just checking for both the conditions. So if I had the number of 6 or 8, you can see even and positive number got printed because it is even also and it is also positive. So both these conditions were true, and that's why this if block got executed. So ultimately what this if block is looking for is a boolean value. Okay, so if the condition or the statements that we write inside this if parentheses, that is round brackets, is true, only then these brackets, that is the if block, is going to be executed. And if this is false, then this entire block would be ignored, it will not be executed. So if I add anything else, or if I say 7, you can see we are not getting this output. So this entire if block is not executed because this entire statement becomes false. Okay, so this was just a quick practical approach on if, and else control statements and 3 different variations of the if else control statement program. So switch case is another control statement which is a conditional control statement, just like if else control statement. However, the usage of switch case is a little bit different. So switch case is generally preferred over the if else when there are n number of test cases needs to be tested, which means that you have a lot of test cases, a lot of conditions to be checked. So for example, let's say you are going to be taking a number from 1 to 100 from the user. So let's say the user enters 1, and then in the output you have to print its textual form, that is 1. Okay, similarly if he enters 2, you have to print 2, and this should go on till 100. Okay, so all this goes till 100. So you can see we have 100 different test cases to test, and you can use the if, and else control statements. But then if you go ahead and do that, the code will also increase a lot and it will not be very clean. And again, switch case is also much more efficient in terms of execution time compared to if else when it comes to larger test cases or larger quantities of test cases. So this is why switch case is usually preferred in JavaScript when there are n number of test cases. Now this control statement, that is switch case in JavaScript, actually performs or works a little bit different compared to switch case in C++ or Java. So if you're coming from those programming languages, switch case in JavaScript works a little bit different, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But let's first actually start off with the programming, and let's see our first question. So let me just quickly first read the question, and then we'll start off with the programming and we'll see the syntax of how switch case works. So the question is, we have to find day of week by accepting its number. For example, if we enter 1, then the output should be Sunday. So that's the first day of week. If you enter 2, the output should be Monday, and so on and so forth. Okay, so 3 would be Tuesday, 4 would be Wednesday, and so on. So here you can see we have 7 different conditions or test cases to be performed, and we can use if else and else if conditions, but then as I mentioned, that is not the efficient way to go ahead with, and we can use switch case in this case. So let's quickly first create a variable. So I'm going to say var day, and I'm just going to hardcode the value as 1. So for simplicity, again, we are not taking input from the user from the web page, because we still have to perform DOM manipulations and understand what are DOM manipulations. We'll come to that when we move ahead in this series. Okay, so this is how we start off with the syntax of switch case. So you just write in switch, and inside that you pass the variable day. So since we want to check for what number we are going to be passing in this variable, we have to pass that variable in this opening and closing round brackets of the switch case. So this is the syntax, and then opening and closing curly braces is for the body of the switch case. Now inside this we have to test for 7 different cases starting from 1 to 7, because we have 7 days of week, right? So here's how the syntax goes. You have to write down case, and then you have to actually write down the value that the day variable is going to be holding. So the value is going to be ranging from 1 to 7, right? So I'm going to say 1 and then give a colon, and below that I'm going to write what I want when the case is 1. Okay, so I'm going to say document dot write in the h2 tag, I'm going to say Sunday. So if value of day is 1, you can see immediately we are getting an output of Sunday. So inside this I'm also going to use a break statement. So remember, break statement also helps us in control statements and managing the control statements. So what this statement does is, once we get our output, once we get our case, this break helps us to come out of the switch case. Okay, so obviously we're going to have multiple cases, right? So we're going to have case 2 also. So inside this I'm just going to copy this and paste it over here, and I'm going to say Monday, right? So again I'm going to include one break over here. So if I don't actually include this break, what happens is, the moment the program finds the right case, so right now our day variable is storing the value of 1, right? Which means that case number 1 is going to be executed, because we are checking if the value is 1, right? So this case is going to be true. So if I remove this break over here, if I just comment it out, you can see along with Sunday even Monday is getting printed. So what is happening is, once the switch case finds the right case, if there is no break statement, all the cases below that case are going to be executed also. So that's why we have to include this break statement, and this break statement helps us to get outside or get out of the switch case immediately. Otherwise all the rest of the cases are also going to be executed even though we are not needing them. So I hope you get the idea why we are using the break statement also. Now similarly I'm just going to write all the cases for all the different days of week. So we have 7 cases. So let me just show you all those cases. Okay, so as you can see on the screen, I have written all the different cases. So we have case 1, case 2, case 3 till case 7, because we have 7 days of week, and depending upon what the variable value is, if I say 6, the output is going to be Friday. If I say 7, it is going to be Saturday, and so on and so forth. Now along with this, what if I enter some random value? Okay, so let's say I enter 78. Now obviously we don't have a day of week which is corresponding to 78, right? So in that case we can have one more case which is known as default, and this basically means that if any of the case doesn't work, so the switch case is gonna go from case number 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 until the end, and if it doesn't get any of the case right or true, the default case is gonna be executed. So in that situation what I'm gonna say is wrong input. So as you can see we got wrong input, and this default case is not necessary, but if you just want to give the user a prompt that he's entered some wrong value, you can always include this default case in the switch case. Okay, so this was our program, that is find the day of week by accepting its number. So any number you put in, you get the corresponding value. If I say 1, I get Sunday. If I say 0, we get wrong input. So our program is working perfectly fine. Now I wanted to talk about switch case a little bit in detail, because in JavaScript switch case works a little bit different compared to in C++ or Java. So in JavaScript, switch case can accept numbers, it can also accept string values, and can also accept boolean values. Okay, so let me just first cut this program. Don't worry, I will be sharing all the code of this program in the video description. You can also get some theory, so make sure you check out the video description. And coming back to this, so this day can have a string, so you can say Monday, and then in the switch case I can say case, in double quotes I can say Monday colon, and the case I can say document dot write first working day. So you can see we got the output, and it's not in a larger font because I have to put it in h2 tag. So there you go, you can see. So you can see that it is accepting strings. Now we can also have a boolean value. So if I say true, so here I can say case true, and again we are getting the output. Now again, one more thing that is different for the switch case in JavaScript is we can also pass in certain expressions or certain calculations in the switch case. So in the switch case, what I can do is, let's say if this is a string value, let's say I'm saying Tanmay. So in the switch case, what I can do is I can concatenate another string, and I can say Sakpal, which is my surname. So totally it will be Tanmay space Sakpal, right? So in the switch case, it is Tanmay space Sakpal. So in the case, what I can do is I can say I'm checking for Tanmay space Sakpal, and there you go, you got the output. That's my name, and that's how it goes. So you can see that switch case in JavaScript has a little bit more functionality, wherein you can add certain things in switch case extra compared to other general purpose programming languages. So as you can see on the screen, we are going to be taking a practical approach, and we are going to be writing two programs using the for loop. So the first one, as you can see on the question, is print table of 5 using for loop, and the second question is going to be print first 5 even numbers. Now a little bit of update on looping or iterative control statements. So when you want to perform an activity n number of times, instead of actually copy pasting that code n number of times, or let's say you want to perform an activity 100 times, or let's say you want to perform a task 100 times, instead of actually copy pasting that task 100 times in the code, what you can do is you can use these looping control statements, and that will make your code very clean and efficient, and definitely save you a lot of line of code in real world scenarios. So in JavaScript, we have 4 different types of loop. Basically, 3 of them are basic ones. The 4th one is the one which works with objects. So we'll see that in further videos. So out of those 3 basic ones, we are looking at for loop, which is our very first looping control statement. And before we actually start off with the coding, just remember this one point, that for loop is used when the number of iterations is known in advance. Okay, so this is something that you need to keep in mind. Okay, so let's start off with question number 1, and it says that we have to print table of 5 using for loop. So basically we have to print a multiplication table. It's not just a table. So let's start with the coding, and let's see the syntax of for loop. So we have to type in for, so this is the keyword, and opening and closing round brackets, and inside that we have 3 different parts for a for loop. So the first one is known as initialization. So I'm gonna write init. Then we have a semicolon, we have condition, another semicolon, and then we have increment or decrement. Now of course these are placeholders, these are not the actual values. I just want to show you what exactly are going to be our parameters, or these 3 different parts of the for loop. And then we have opening and closing curly braces. So in the initialization, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable. So I'm going to say var x equals to 1. Okay, so this initialization happens only one time when the for loop begins to run at the very start. Now when we are using loops, we need to be careful that we have to give a proper condition. And the reason is, if you do not give a proper condition, that loop will run forever sometimes. And that is known as infinite loop. Okay, so that will crash your program. And this happens a lot. If you are coming from some other programming language, you must be knowing about infinite loops. We'll talk about infinite loops later in this series. If you're an absolute beginner, you'll come to know what exactly it is. But just to give you a little bit of warning and heads up, that we have to use a condition wisely. So in the condition, what we have to give is a value, as in for how many times or for how long your for loop should execute. Now obviously we want to print the multiplication table of 5, which means that we want to print 5, 10, 15, 20 till 50, right? So we want to have 10 iterations to print the entire multiplication table of 5. So in the condition, what I'm going to say is x less than equal to 10. And in the increment or decrement operator, I'm going to say x plus plus. So let me just fill out the body of the for loop, and then I'll explain to you how the 3 different parts in the for condition works. So in the body, I'm just going to say document dot write in the h2 tag, and then I'm just going to add a plus and in the opening and closing parentheses, I'm going to say 5 star x, again plus opening and closing double quotes and h2 close. So I'll explain to you what I did over here and a semicolon. I'm going to save this and I'm going to refresh the browser. The reason why I did not go live in this case is because if we make any mistake in the condition, what happens is you can go into an infinite loop and then your browser keeps on loading itself and then you have to again stop the live server and again refresh it. So it is a hassle. So if you're an absolute beginner and if you tend to make mistakes in loops, then I would not recommend you go live. So I'm going to refresh this and there you go. You can see 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50. So you got 10 different outputs. That is, we got the complete multiplication table. So now let's come back to the for loop and understand what is happening. So the for loop is also termed as an entry controlled loop, which means that the condition is checked at the very first. So when the first time the for loop runs, what is happening is we perform the initialization. So this part only happens once. So this variable is created and it is storing value 1, and this happens only one time when the for loop begins to run. Now the next thing that is happening is the condition is checked. So the condition is x less than equal to 10. So we know that for the first round or for the first loop or the first iteration, x value is 1, right? So is 1 less than equal to 10 true, right? So since this condition is true, the control is transferred inside the for loop, that is inside the body of the for loop, and one statement that is there inside the for loop is executed for the one time. And for the first time, what we are doing is we are taking 5 into x, and we know for the first round x value is 1. So 5 into 1 is going to be 5, and that is printed in h2 tags. So what I did over here is I'm using an actual value 5 and I'm multiplying it with x for every iteration, and for the first time we know that x value is 1. So 5 star 1, that is 5 into 1 is going to give you 5, and then again the control is transferred to the condition wherein x is incremented by 1 value. So x plus plus means x is equal to x plus 1, which means the current value of x was 1. For the second time, x is going to be incremented by 1, which means x is going to be 2. So again the condition is checked. Now the initialization doesn't happen. Now only the condition is checked. So x is 2, and we check if x is less than equal to 10. Since x is 2, 2 is less than equal to 10, correct, which means that this again condition is true. So again the for loop is going to be executed, and this time x value is 2. So 5 into 2 is going to be 10. So that is printed over here. Similarly, till the value becomes 10, this for loop is going to be executed, and when the value is incremented to 11, this condition is going to be false. So we know that 11 is not less than equal to 10, right? So then the for loop is exited. So this is the basic working of for loop. What you can do is, if you're an absolute beginner, you can just write down this for loop in your notebook and dry run it at every step. And when I say dry run, it means that actually writing the value of x and writing the value of 5 into star x at every step. And when you do it on paper, then you understand how the value is going ahead and how the value is incrementing and how the for loop is working. Okay, so this was program number 1. Let's quickly see for program number 2 what we have to do. For program number 2, we have to print first 5 even numbers. So it is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, right? So let's start doing that. So in the for loop, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start the value of x from 2. Since we want to start from 2, right? We want to start from 2, then we have to go to 4, then 6, then 8, then 10. Now for the condition, I'm going to keep it same because you can see that since the first 5 even numbers are under 10, that is from 2 to 10, I'm going to say x is less than equal to 10. But for the increment, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say x plus equal to 2. Now this plus equal to is an assignment operator, and basically what plus equal to does is it takes the current value and adds 2 to it. So when I say x plus equal to 2, it is equivalent to x is equal to x plus 2. Okay. So x plus equal to 2 and x is equal to x plus 2 is one and the same thing. So basically I'm just incrementing the value of x by 2 in every iteration instead of 1. And inside this I'm just gonna print the value of x because we just want 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, right? We don't want multiplication table over here. So let's save this and let's see if this works. And there you go, you can see in the output we have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So this is the output that we wanted. Now a little variation what you can do in the for loop is you don't need to have initialization part always in the for loop. You can cut this and you can do the initialization over here also. Even then your program will work. If I refresh this, you can see it's working. So that is also fine. In fact, even this is not necessary. You can erase this and you can even erase this. And even then your program will work, but it will go in infinite loop because you're not giving any condition. So the for loop is going to run forever. So don't do that. If you do this and if you refresh this, I think it will go into our infinite loop. There you go, you can see it's gone into an infinite loop because we haven't provided any condition. So it's running forever and this will definitely crash your program. So yeah, this was a little bit about for loop, and one key point that I mentioned that you need to remember is for loop is used when the number of iterations is known in advance. So this is something that is unique to for loop because even while loop operates pretty much similar to for loop, but the only difference is we use while loop when we don't know the number of iterations. Okay. Otherwise, even while loop is an entry controlled loop, and when I say entry controlled, it means that the condition is checked before executing the loop. Okay, so for the first time also, first the condition is going to be checked, and depending upon if this condition is true or false, the statements inside the loop are executed. So if it is true, only then it is executed, otherwise it is not executed. And in contrast, the do while loop, that is the third basic loop, is the exit control loop, which means that the condition is checked afterwards and first time the loop always executes. So the while loop is preferred or used when you don't know the number of iterations but you know that a particular condition is going to be true for a certain number of times. So I'll explain to you in detail, but let's just first see the question number 1 and we'll first type in the code for the while loop. So you can see we have to print 5 odd numbers using while loop. Okay, so this is a very simple question. Let's start off with the syntax. So we type in while, so that's the keyword, opening and closing round brackets, and the body of the while in curly braces. So inside this, unlike for loop, we don't have 3 different parts, we only have one single condition, and until that condition is going to be true, this while loop will execute itself. So now we have to print 5 odd numbers, first 5 odd numbers using while loop, right? So I'm just going to initialize one variable over here. I'm going to say var x and I'm going to give the value of 1. So 1 is our very first odd number, right? So that's why I gave it 1. And now in the condition, what I'm going to say is x less than equal to 10. Or I can also say x less than 10 because the first 5 numbers are going to be 1, 3, 5, 7 and 9, right? So they are going to be very well under 10. So that's why I gave x less than 10. Now inside the while loop, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to print out the x value. So I'm going to say document.write in the h1 tag, and then I'm just going to append the value of x, close the h1 tag and save this. So what I did over here is I'm just printing out this x value. But now you can notice that if we just try to print this and if we just try to run this much code, our program is going to go into an infinite loop, and the reason is because we are not doing anything to increment the x value. So in for loop, remember we had initialization, then we had the condition, and then we had increment or decrement part also, right? So that was taking care of the incrementation. But here we have to manually do that. So below this, I'm just going to say x is equal to x plus 2. Now the reason why I did x plus 2 is because we want to go from 1 to 3, 3 to 5, 5 to 7. So the increment is of 2 units, right? Not just 1. You can also write x plus equal to 2 over here. That is also totally fine because it is one and the same thing. And now if I save this and if I refresh our browser, you can see we got the output 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. So let me just comment this out and you'll understand how it goes in infinite loop. If I refresh this, you can see that it is refreshing forever, and this is basically your program going in infinite loop, and this will crash your program. So nothing will work on the website. So this is another case of infinite loop. So you have to completely stop this, open a new tab, and again you have to run the entire file, and there you go, you get back your original answer. So now coming back to the difference of while loop and for loop. So the program that we did over here can also be done using for loop, right? So where is while loop going to be used? So consider an example where you want to load some data. So you have some data coming in and you don't know the number of lines or number of rows of data that is going to come in. So every time it's going to be different. So in that scenario, you don't know how many times you want to print that data, or you want to store it somewhere, or you want to display it. So in that case, you can use while loop, wherein you can give in the condition that till the rows or till the data is coming in, keep on executing or keep on displaying it. Another example can be, let's say a user is inputting some value, and depending upon what he inputs, you want to print something or you want to keep on doing something. So let's say he is inputting an alphabet A, and when he clicks A, you want to do something, but when he clicks X, you want to stop the process. So in the while loop, you can say that when that character that he enters becomes X, only then you stop the process, otherwise you keep on going. So that can be one example. Right now, since we haven't still seen the DOM manipulations wherein we take input from user, I'm not able to give you a very particular example wherein only while loop will work. But as we move ahead in this series, we might see a program wherein only while loop will work, and then you'll understand the difference between for and while. Otherwise, as I mentioned, both of them are entry controlled looping control statements wherein the condition is first checked. So if this x less than 10 was not true, these statements wouldn't have been executed at all. So the syntax goes as follows. You write in do, then you open and close the curly braces, that is the body of the do while loop, and at the end of the curly braces wherein you have the closing curly brace, you write while, and then you open and close the round brackets which will contain the condition, and then you give a semicolon. So don't forget to give this semicolon over here. And what we're going to do is we're going to print my name or print any text 5 times. So this is just to display the working of do while loop. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say where x equals to 5. Okay. And inside the condition part of the do while loop, what I'm going to say is while x greater than 5. Okay. So the condition is x should be greater than 5. If x is greater than 5, only then this loop is going to be executed. But we know that our x is 5. Let's say if x is 1. Okay. So x is 1 and x is not greater than 5, right? So this loop should not execute. However, as I mentioned, since this is a do while loop, this condition is going to be checked after the first iteration. So if I say document.write, and in the h2 tag if I print my name, this will run one time. Okay. So let me just save this, and if I refresh this, there you go, you can see we got the output Tanmay once even when the condition was false. And the reason is because this is an exit control statement wherein the condition is checked after first time or first iteration. Now if I make this 6 and if I refresh this, this will go in an infinite loop because we are not performing increment or decrement over here, right? So we need to do that also. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to say x minus minus. So what will happen? First time x is 6 and first time the body of the do while loop will execute even without checking the condition. So this will get printed. Now x will get minus minus, which means x will become 5. So 5 is not greater than 5, right? So it will not be executed. So let's just make this 7 and let's see if our name gets printed 2 times. And there you go, you can see our name got printed 2 times. Now if I make this 0, still one time it is going to be executed anyhow because as I mentioned the condition is checked after the first iteration. So this is the only speciality of do while loop and the variation compared to for and while loop. So if you're wondering where exactly do while loop is used, sometimes what happens is even though the condition is false for the first time, you have to execute that command. Okay. So let's say you're displaying a menu wherein you'll be giving user some options, and depending upon what option the user selects, you'll again loop through the different sub options or subtypes. So in that case, you have to show that menu first, right? So depending upon whether the condition is true or false, at least you need to show that menu. So that can be done in do while loop wherein you at least display the first screen, and then if the condition is false or true or depending upon what user enters, then you can exit the loop or you can continue with the loop. So again, this was just a syntax denotion. This was not a program which was specifically for do while loop. We rarely come across such programs wherein do while loop is very essential. So I just wanted to show you the syntax and what exactly do while loop does, how it looks and how it differs from other loops. Functions are basically block of code which is being given a particular name so that we can reuse that block of code again and again in our entire program. So you can see there is a little bit of theory already. Functions are one of the fundamental building blocks in JavaScript. A function is a set of statements that performs a particular task or calculates a value. A JavaScript function is a block of code designed to perform a particular task, and a function is executed when something invokes it. So you can find more theory in the video description. I will link an article wherein you can see everything on functions, basically in the theoretical perspective and also the code that we type in today. But before we actually get into technicality, let me just give you a very basic example. So let's say you want to perform addition of 2 numbers in your program. Okay. So performing addition, what you do is you create 2 variables where a and you assign 5. You create one more variable where b equals to 6. Then you create another variable where total, you say a plus b. And let's say now you want to print this. So you say document.write. And this is what you do, right? So if I change the value over here, you can see the addition also changes. So this is how you perform addition at a very basic level. Now let's say in your program, the requirement is that you have to perform this same addition 5 times. So if you didn't have functions, what you would do is you would just copy this code and probably paste it 5 more times, right? So this would definitely increase your line of code, and it doesn't make sense to copy paste the same code over and over again if it's going to be doing the same thing. So this is where functions come into picture, and basically what it does is, what you can do is you can create a separate function and give it a particular name. Let's say add two numbers, and inside that function you can add these 3 lines or these 3 statements, and then you can just use that one single function name over and over again to call these 3 lines. So you save 3 lines of code. Now this might not sound relevant enough, but in real world scenarios, when you're writing big programs, there are a lot of repetitive tasks which are having hundreds of lines of code. So you cannot copy paste hundreds of lines of code in your program over and over again. So instead of that, you create functions. Okay, so with this little bit of knowledge on functions, let's try to see what we have in question number 1. So you can see we have to write a function to add 2 numbers and print the result. So this is what we did over here, but we have to do it using functions. So I'm just gonna cut this out. Now the syntax of functions in JavaScript goes as follows. You just type in the keyword function. That's it. So there is no return type required over here because we know JavaScript is weakly typed. So we can dynamically change the type of functions, and functions are already overloaded in nature. And I don't want to get into a lot of details of function overloading and all as of now. But for now, just type in the keyword functions and then you give a name of your function. So I'm going to say add 2 numbers, and then opening and closing round brackets, which denotes that it is a function, and opening and closing curly braces, which is the body of the function. So there is a naming convention being followed. You don't have to follow it, but generally what happens is the first word in the function name starts with a lowercase. Then you can have numbers or you don't have numbers, that's your call. But the second word usually starts with the uppercase, okay? Or you can also have an underscore in between. You cannot have numbers as starting for the function name. So similar to the naming conventions for variables, that same rules apply over here. Okay, so this is the basic structure of our function, okay? You just write in function, and then this is our function name, opening and closing round brackets. And now inside this, what we'll do is we'll just cut this code and paste it over here. Also, we'll just cut this code and paste it over here as well. Okay, so we have created our function. However, you can see in the output, we cannot see anything because we still have to call the function. Okay, so this is just the function declaration and definition wherein we've defined our function, we've named our function, and we've told that this is what it is gonna do. But in the entire script tag, we still haven't called this function. So there is a concept of function call. So if I just write down add number and opening and closing round brackets and hit a semicolon, immediately you can see that we are getting the output that the total is 8. So what we did over here is we called the function. So this is a function call. So the program knows that, okay, so there is a function which looks like this, and it goes and checks this function and calls it, and all these values are executed. So now a function can also have parameters. So what do I mean by parameters? So now here you can see that we've hard-coded these values 5 and 3. But what if you want to pass these values in the function? So you can do that also. So you can say a comma b. So these are basically the parameters, and you don't even have to give the data type because JavaScript is loosely or weakly typed. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to say total is equal to a plus b. And right now you can see in the output we are not getting anything because over here we have not passed anything. So since you can see that now our function is a little bit different because it is expecting 2 parameters over here, I'm going to pass 2 parameters 3, 4. So immediately you can see we got the output, the total is 7. Now we can also pass strings over here. So if I say Tanmay space, and over here if I say Sakpal, you can see the total is Tanmay space Sakpal, which means that it just concatenated the 2 strings. So depending upon what data type you pass in over here, our function is automatically adapting or adjusting to the data types because, as I mentioned, JavaScript is loosely typed. So the data type of the variables is dynamically taken and it can change over the course of time. So these were parameter passing in the function. So we passed in Tanmay as a value and Sakpal as b value. So inside the function, a is holding Tanmay and b is holding Sakpal, and it just took an addition, that is concatenation, stored it in the local total variable and just printed it out. Now lastly, what I want to talk about is return type in functions. So a function can also return a value. Okay, right now you can see that our function is doing the printing work. So let's say this statement is over here and the function here is going to just perform the total or perform the addition and return this variable outside. So what this return statement does is, so whenever you call your function, you can see we are calling our function over here add number. So we are passing two parameters, Tanmay and Sakpal. So these parameters go in as A and B. We get the total, that is we are getting the concatenation of Tanmay and Sakpal, and then we are getting a return value, right? So when this return statement comes in the function, this total is actually given out of this function. So there has to be a particular variable to hold this value which is returned from this function. So I'm going to say where output equals to, and on the RHS I'm calling this function. So you can see we have equal to in between. On the LHS we have a variable, on the RHS, that is right hand side, we are calling the function. And the reason why you kept it on the RHS is because now our function is returning a value, and when it returns a value the assignment will happen from right to left. So whatever the function is returning is being assigned into this variable, and right now it is returning Tanmay Sakpal, so that's why it is being stored in the output variable, and that is what I'm printing over here in the document.write function. Similarly, if I just pass in numbers, you can see the total is 6. So 6 is being stored and it is returned using this return statement. So when it is returned, it is stored in this output variable outside the function, and then we just print it. And in JavaScript, things are pretty easy. We only have two different types of scope, that is global and local. So depending upon where you create the variable, your variable is going to be having two different types of scope. And when I say scope, it means that the life of the variable. Okay. So let me just actually show it to you. So let's say you create a variable A over here, you assign the value of 5, and now you want to print it. So you print it on the screen using the document.write function. And now what you can do is anywhere below in this entire script, you can again copy paste this and again print this variable, and the value still exists, right? Which means that this variable that you created over here is usable or is alive throughout this entire script till the very end. Okay. So this is basically a global variable, which means that its life is available throughout the entire page and throughout the entire script. So what is a local variable then? So when you define a variable inside a function, that variable is a local variable to that function. Okay. So let's try to do that now. So we've already seen what are functions in the previous video. If you don't know what functions are, you can check that video. So I'm just going to create a function saying function my function, opening and closing round brackets, and the body of the function. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut this and paste it inside the function. And now you can see the output. We are not getting any kind of output because this A is now inside this function. So now it is not a global variable, it is a local variable, which means that it exists only inside this function. So let's cut this and let's paste this inside, and let's give a function call to our newly created function. So I'm going to say my function, opening and closing round brackets and semicolon. And now you can see again phi is printed. Because we are giving a call to this function, these two lines inside this function is executed, and variable A exists only inside this function, so it is local, and that's why it is printed. However, you can see we have one more document.write which is outside the function, but since our variable A is declared and created inside the function, here the value does not exist, which means that variable A outside the function does not exist. It is destroyed as soon as the function is over. Okay. And this applies to the memory also. So whenever you are running your JavaScript and your programs, your entire Chrome browser itself is in the RAM, it's running in the memory. So these variables are also created inside the memory. So these local variables are created only till the function is executing, and once the function is done executing, the memory of that function is wiped out, so the variables are also destroyed. However, the variables that are global, which are available throughout the script, will have a global lifetime, which means they will exist throughout the entire running of the application as long as your tab is open. Okay. So another thing about global variables is you can access global variables inside functions also. So let's say I create another global variable where B, and I say value is 6. I can access this inside our own function also. So if I say print B over here, you can see my function can access this B variable which is created outside the function, and you can see the value is printed as 6, which means that global variables can be accessed inside functions. However, local variables which are inside the function cannot be accessed outside, because here you can see we are doing that. We are trying to print the local variable a, but the value is not being printed. Okay, so one last thing that I wanted to talk about variables, which I did not mention in the first video of variables, was when you create a variable, we use var keyword, right? However, in JavaScript, we can exclude that, which means that we don't actually need to use the var keyword also. And you can directly say var1 is equal to and assign the value. And this is still a variable, okay? So you don't have to explicitly type in var. But what happens is when you do this, this becomes a global variable by default. Okay, so if I cut this and if I paste this inside over here also, this var1 is still a global variable because we did not use the var keyword, and now it is a global variable, which means you can access the value outside the function. But there is a slight issue, and that issue is our new browsers operate under a strict mode wherein they restrict the use of such kind of global variables. Okay. So global variables which are created inside a function without using var keyword are not directly accessible, even though they are global. Okay. So I don't want to get into a lot of details. I just wanted to talk about that you can create variables without the var keyword and still you won't get an error. Arrays come under the category of composite or complex data types, and basically arrays in JavaScript are a different type of object. And I know we've not talked about objects, so you'll understand that as we move ahead. But before starting off with the arrays, let's take a scenario here. So as you can see on the screen, I have three different variables, car1, car2, car3, and basically they are storing different brands of cars. So for now you can see that we only have three different types of cars or three different brands of cars. But in real world scenarios, you know that there are many brands and this variable list can go on and on, right? Or let's say, for example, in general, your program requires that you need to have 100 different variables storing some values. Let's say there is a range of numbers that you want to store and you have to create 100 variables. So at that time, creating individual variables, let's say A, B, C, D, and so on and so forth till you exhaust all the alphabets doesn't make sense, right? And let's say what if your program demands that you want to iterate or you want to loop through all these variables and you have to perform certain operations also. So again, that becomes more tedious. So just imagine that you're creating 100 different variables and then you also have to remember the names and then you have to perform operations onto it. And in real world scenarios, yes, you'll be creating a lot of variables because your programs are not going to be like 10 lines of code, right? It's going to be hundreds of lines of code. So this is where arrays come into picture, and what arrays help us do is you can store a multiple list of values under one single name. Now if you're coming from any other programming background, the concept of arrays is pretty much the same. However, in JavaScript, arrays work a little bit different because arrays are dynamic in nature here and you can have different data type of values in the arrays, and we'll come to that in a minute. You'll understand it very well. But let's start off with representation of arrays and let's create an array in JavaScript. So here you can see we have three basic variables. Now to replace these three variables, what I can do is I can say var cars, I can say equal to opening and closing square brackets, which means that it is an array. So this is what indicates that it is an array. And inside this, I can say double quotes BMW, comma, double quotes Volvo, comma, double quotes Audi. So as you can see on the right hand side over here, the output is already printed because we are using the live server plugin. And this is one single name. So the array name is cars. So basically it is a composite data type variable who has one single name, but it is storing a list of values, right? So instead of creating three different variables, we just created one and we stored the entire list. So this is one way of creating arrays in JavaScript. Now arrays in JavaScript are indexed, and basically what it means that every value which is stored is at a position. So it starts from 0. So BMW is at 0th position, Volvo is at position number 1, and Audi is at position number 2. So this is how the indexing happens. It starts with 0. So if you want to individually access any value, let's say you just want to access the first or the 0th element, that is the first element basically in the cars array, what you do is in the output you just put in square brackets and you put the value that you want to access. So if I put 0 over here, in the output you can see I got BMW. If I put 1, you can see I'll get Volvo. If I put 2, you can see I'll get Audi. Now this is a major advantage because now you can loop through this array using this index. So let's say you want to print these values one line at a time. So I can use a for loop over here. Now we've already seen what are for loops and different types of loops also. So I'm going to say for, I'm going to say var I equals to 0, I less than 3, because our index starts from 0 and it ends at 2. So it has to be I less than 3. And I'm going to say I plus plus. And now what I'm going to do is just cut this and put it inside the curly braces. You can actually exclude the curly braces if you have only one statement in the for loop. So if I erase this, even this is gonna work, but typically I don't do that. But you can see now what I'm doing over here is if I just replace this 2 with I, you can see I can get all the values starting from BMW, Volvo, Audi, because I over here is iterating in the for loop. So I value keeps on changing, and every time we change the value, we are getting a new value from the array. So we are printing BMW first, then Volvo, then Audi. So this is where you can access the values easily in loops also. So let's say you have 100 values in the cars variable, that is cars array. You can easily use a for loop to access all the 100 values, and you can use this iteration concept of loops. So this is not possible if you are storing these values in individual variables, right? So this is one more advantage. Now there is another way in which you can create arrays. You can say var arr1 is equal to new. So this is a new keyword called as new. Obviously we'll talk about new in detail in further videos. And then you can say array, and in opening and closing round brackets you can put in the values if you want. So I'm going to say mango, then I'm going to say apple, then I'm going to say banana and semicolon. And again the same thing, if I want to print them, I can just change the name of the array, which is arr1, and you can see the values change over here. So this is another way. Typically this is not used, it's not recommended. This is the more easier way to create arrays. But let's say you want to declare it at first line. Let's say you just say arr1 over here, and now you want to make it an array. So at that time you have to use the new keyword. You have to say arr1 is equal to new array, and then inside this you have to actually pass in the values. Okay, so these are the two different ways. We'll talk more in detail about arrays also, but few more things that I want to talk about over here is arrays, as I mentioned in JavaScript, are little different compared to Java programming or C++, because arrays are dynamic in nature. So when I say they are dynamic in nature, basically what I mean is you can add on extra values in the array at runtime, so it's not a fixed sized array. It can always increase in length or decrease in length, and you can also add different data types. So what I can do is I can say cars.push, and I can add something else. So I can say Mercedes, and when I loop through the for loop, I can increase the size. I can say 4, and there you go. You can see I got one more value. So now you must be wondering, what is this push? So as I mentioned earlier, arrays are different type of objects in JavaScript, and when we talk about objects have certain properties and methods that come along with them. Okay, so since arrays are predefined in JavaScript, so you don't create arrays yourself, right? So everything that an array does is already there in JavaScript. So when you create an array, there are some methods that come along with the arrays, and there are some properties also. So this .push, that is this method, is an extra property that comes along with this array. Similarly, if you just type in cars and say dot, you can see all the number of methods that are associated with the arrays. So all the square or the cubes are basically the methods, and then there are some properties also. You can see this blue length thing. So this is a property. So we have properties and methods associated with arrays or any objects typically. So this length gives us the current length of the cars. So in the for loop, what I can do is, instead of giving a static value, I can say cars.length, and then by default the length is going to be equal to the size of the array. Now the size of the array is the number of elements it has. So initially you can see that we had 3 elements. Even though the index starts from 0, the size is going to be 1, 2 and 3 elements, and then we added one more, right? So now the size is increased to 4. So that's why whatever the size is, by default the size will come from over here. So if I just comment this out, now the size has decreased and the length value is going to be 3 over here. So it can dynamically increase or decrease over the course of time. One more thing that I mentioned is you can also add different data type values, right? So instead of adding a string, So right now we have 4 different strings, right? What I can do is I can add a number also. So let's say I just add 2, and there you go. You can see now the array is holding 3 strings and then we have a number 2. So this is different because in C++ or Java we know that arrays do not store different data types, and then we have different data structures to do that. But arrays don't do that, right? But in JavaScript it is dynamic also, that is the size can decrease and increase over the course of time, and it can also store different data types of values in one single array. JavaScript is an object-oriented programming language. Yes, it is not object-based, it is object-oriented programming because it does support inheritance. It has objects, it has even classes now, it has encapsulation, abstraction, and all those object-oriented features. But they are implemented slightly differently in JavaScript. So if you're coming from C++ or Java or those general purpose object-oriented programming languages, things are going to be a little bit different, but then the underlying concepts are going to be pretty much the same. Okay, now coming to the concept of objects. So before we get into objects, let's take a scenario over here. So as you can see on the screen, I have 3 variables which have data about a particular car. So we have car brand, the car brand is Tesla, the car model is Model 3, that's the name of the model, and the price is 35,000 USD, that is US dollars. So these are the 3 different things that we are storing for one particular car of a particular brand. And then we also have a function which basically tells what the car is capable of. So this function is Tesla Autopilot, which essentially means that this car has autopilot feature. So this is a behavior, right? So car can drive, car can have autopilot, car can do reverse parking, so on and so forth, So that's kind of like a behavior of that car. So things look pretty okay over here. We've defined, or we have data about the car in 3 different variables. We have a function associated with that car, but things get complicated when we actually want to have more than one car. Okay, so let's say your program states that you need to have 10 different car models with all the data of car brand, car model, price, and then corresponding different behaviors of different cars. So not all Tesla models or not all cars will have autopilot feature, right? So even that will vary. So this is where the problem arises. Are you going to copy paste this entire thing and just paste it again and then change the names? So you'll have to do car brand 2, car model 2, change the brand name, change the model name. You also have to change the variable names and the function names. So imagine you doing this for 10 different types of cars, 10 different brands of cars, and then it goes on and on, right? So this doesn't make sense. This is definitely the most inefficient way to actually tackle this problem. And what happens is, in real world scenarios, typically when you are storing data or when you are accessing some data, it's not just one variable that you can put in all the data. And that's because in real world scenarios, the things that you're going to be storing data about have multiple attributes. So let's say you're storing a data for a person. You have his first name, last name, age, gender, salary, and so on and so forth. Let's say you're storing data about fruits. You have the type of fruit, you have the name of the fruit, you have the season in which the fruit grows. If you're storing data about certain animals, you have the features of that animals, whether it's a cold-blooded animal, a warm-blooded animal, whether it's mammal, whether it's reptile, and then different categories, right? So this means that you are going to be accessing, storing a lot of data about one particular thing. So this is where the concept of objects come into picture, because objects mimic the real world scenarios much better than these single variables. So essentially what these objects help us do is to bundle all these properties, all these attributes about one particular entity. Let's say car for this example. So you can put all these 3 things, that is all these properties of a car, under one single name and make it an object. So how do you go about doing that? So now let's see the syntax, how to go ahead and create an object in JavaScript, and things will get more and more clear as we go ahead in this series. So there are few ways in which you can create objects in JavaScript. I'm just going to show a couple of them which are most standard ones and most likely used. So the first one is the literal way, known as the literal object way. So you just type in var car equal to, and now you just open and close curly braces. So this denotes that this car variable is actually an object. Okay. Now inside this, you define all the properties of the car, that is what all data you want to store about it. So you can have car underscore brand colon and then the name of the brand. So I'm going to say Tesla. Give a comma over here if you want to have more properties. But now you can see the variable inside this car object is being denoted a little bit differently. So outside we were having a equal to sign, inside we are having a colon, and we are not having a semicolon at the end. We are just having a comma because we want to add one more or more properties. So we have car model. I'm just going to copy and paste it over here. Again colon, it's model 3 comma, just going to copy this, and instead of equal to, it's going to be colon again. And yeah, these are the three things, that is, these are the three attributes or properties for the car. So for this object car, we have three different attributes that are associated with it. Now we can also have the functions inside this object, and when we create a function inside the object, it is basically called as a method. So it is just the different naming convention. Essentially it is a function only, but when a function is inside a class or an object, it is termed as a method. Okay, so that's the naming convention. So again, creating the method inside the car object, you can go ahead and say the name of the method colon. So it's a function, right? So you just have to say function, opening and closing round brackets because it is a function, opening and closing curly braces, and showing an error because I forgot to add a comma over here, and now the error will go. And then just copy this and paste it inside. And yeah, you can see our object is completely ready. So what we basically did is we bundled all these things and coupled it inside one single variable name, and now this variable car is actually an object. So I can just cut this all out, cut this also. And now when I want to print out the car brand or car model, what I can do is in the document.write method, I can say car.car brand. So you can see Tesla got printed. So using the dot operator, I can associate the property of this object. So these three things are properties of this car object, and this is a method which is associated with this car object. So I can also call the method using the dot operator. So I can say Tesla autopilot, opening and closing round brackets, and you can see this car has autopilot. Okay, so the reason why it was showing undefined is because it was not returning anything. Now what I did is I returned the string from this method. So when I call this method over here, just the string is printed, and even if I remove this h2 tags, it will still be inside h2 tags because I'm using h2 over here. And if I didn't return this, what I could have done is I could have directly said car.Tesla autopilot, and it would have done the same thing. Okay, because I'm already printing the message over here, so I don't need to do document.write over here. And if I'm doing document.write over here, I can erase this and use a return statement and return this string itself. Okay, so yeah, this was about objects, but now you must be wondering, okay, so what if I want to create more cars? Then again I have to copy paste this entire code and change the things inside, right? So that's one and the same thing that was happening with the normal variables. So this is where the next type or the next way of creating objects comes into picture, wherein I can use something which is known as object constructors. So this is different if you're coming from any other object-oriented programming language, because we are not using classes in this case. In the newer versions of JavaScript, direct classes is also supported. You can create a class and then create objects out of it, but we are not going to go that way. We're going to do it the old school way, wherein we are going to be using the object constructor. So I'm just going to comment this all out, and now we're going to see another way in which you can go ahead and create multiple objects using one single template, which is known as function constructor or constructor function. So this constructor function is acting like a template which will help us create more objects. So you have to write in function. So because it is a function, you have to type in function. Then the name of the function, I'm going to say car, or I'm going to say cars. Now inside the opening and closing round brackets, we're going to be passing all the parameters that we are going to be needing. So this is car brand, this is car model, and this is going to be price. So these are placeholders or arguments, you can say. Then opening and closing curly braces of the function. So that's the function body. Now here what I'm going to say is I'm going to say this dot car brand is equal to car underscore brand. So what I just did is when I'm going to create an object using this constructor function, I'm going to be passing certain values, right? So I'm going to pass the car brand name, car model, and car price. So all these values are going to be on the RHS, and this dot car brand is going to be the actual property of the object. So you'll understand that when we actually create the object. Let me just first type it out. Okay, so I'm done with the properties. Now let's see one method that we have to also add inside this constructor function. So you can have a function inside this constructor function also using the this keyword again. So I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to say dot and then the function name. So the function name or the method name was Tesla autopilot, right? I'm going to say equal to, and it's a function, right? So I'm going to say function, opening and closing round brackets of the function, and again opening and closing curly braces for the function. And inside this again the same thing, I'm just going to print it out, and this completes our constructor function. Okay, so using this constructor function we can create multiple objects of this car type. So this is sort of like a template, sort of like a class what we do in C++ or Java, So now here what I can do is I can say where C1, that is car1, is equal to, and using the new keyword I can say cars. So here what I'm doing is I'm calling this constructor function, and here of course I need to pass the values. So I'm going to say Tesla comma model 3, and the price is going to be 3500 USD. Now if I say C1 dot Tesla autopilot, you can see that we got the output, right? Similarly, I can also have one more object. Now I can say C2, it can be some other model, so I can say model P over here, and the price is going to be different. Let's say it's 45,000. And now I can also print out C2 dot car model, and you can see immediately we got model P, which means that we created another object with different car name, but we created it in using one single line. So we didn't have to type all this again, or we didn't have to do this thing over and over again. So these are the two different ways in which we can go ahead and create object. I'm going to wrap this video over here. I know this is a lot as of now. As we move ahead, we'll probably see more things. We'll not be diving a lot into every object oriented feature of JavaScript, because probably we won't be needing, because in this series mostly we're going to be concentrating on DOM manipulations and client side front end scripting. So not a lot of things regarding object oriented programming, especially the concepts, are going to be needed. But yeah, an overall understanding of objects is definitely needed. So that's why this video and probably a couple of more videos we'll cover on objects and try to understand more about them. So this was the code that we wrote for objects in JavaScript in the previous video, wherein we declared or created a car object which had three properties: car brand, car model, and price, and one method inside the object, that is the autopilot function. And then when we use the method with the dot operator with the car, that is the object car, you can see that we are getting the output of this car has autopilot. Okay, so this was something that we did in the previous video also. So talking about objects in JavaScript, pretty much a lot of things in JavaScript are actually objects. So Boolean values can also be object if they are declared with new keyword. So we know in JavaScript we have basic data types, right? So we have Boolean, we have numbers, we have strings. So these are three basic data types. We have undefined and null also. But then these three basic data types can also be converted, or they also have their equivalent object forms if they are defined with new keyword. Okay. And then we have some predefined objects also. We have date objects, we have math object, we have regular expressions, which are also considered objects in JavaScript. So a lot of things are objects in JavaScript. In fact, a lot of DOM manipulations that we are going to be doing in further videos, that is when we are going to be changing the HTML document. Say for example, you want to change the color of the paragraph tag, you want to increase the size, you want to perform certain animations and do a lot of DOM manipulations, that is document object model manipulations. In that scenarios also, we are going to be using objects to access different parts of the website, and hence it is kind of essential to understand the objects as a whole. So moving ahead, I just said that all the basic data types, that is the Boolean, the numbers, and the strings, can also be represented in their object form. So the way we do that is you can say where str1 is equal to new string, and now this is a variable which is an object of string data type. Okay, so if I say str1 dot, you can see the number of methods that are associated with this object now, right? So we know that we have methods in objects, we have properties in objects. So by default, this str1 is now an object and it gets all those methods also. And then there are different ways in which you can figure out whether a variable is an object or a basic data type. And to do that, we can use the type of operator. Okay, so we have type of, and if I say str1, so it will give me the type of this str1. So what is this variable currently? It will return this value. So if I just print this in document.write, so I'm just gonna copy this and paste it over here. I'm gonna comment this and I'm gonna cut this out, and I'm just gonna put it inside the document.write thing. And there you go, you can see this is an object now. It's very small. Let me just put it in h2 tags. So there you can see this is an object now. So this is how you basically create an object by using the new keyword, and then this string has to have a capital S. So that is how you differentiate between an object and a basic variable. So instead of this, if I just replace it with a string, let's say it is str, immediately you can see in the output we are getting it as a string. So now it is not an object. This variable str is having a data type of string, which is a primitive data type. Earlier it was an object because we used the new keyword and we created a new string object. So that's why it was returning an object. So using the type of operator or type of function, you can say, you can find out whether a variable is an object type or a normal primitive type. Okay, so coming back to our car object. So what if after you declare this entire object, you define its properties and you define its methods, you realize that you have missed out on a particular property and you want to add it further in your code somewhere down. So let's say you have 100 lines of code in between. So you have 100 lines of code in between, and after that you realize, okay, your car object needs to have one more property, which is the fuel type, whether it is on electric or whether it is petrol or whether it is diesel. So you can do that outside the object definition also in JavaScript. So you can say car dot fuel type and you can say it is electric, and what this line will do is it will add one more property inside this existing car object that you have created, because you're using this same name, right? So this is one object having 3 properties over here, but here we have added one more property, and you can test this or you can check this out by printing this. So if I just want to check it out, I can say car.fuel_type and print it over here, and there you go. You can see in the output we are getting electric. So if I just comment this out, you'll see we are getting an output of undefined because we don't have car.fuel_type as a property. So right now we don't have any fuel type as a property over here because we just commented this. If I uncomment it, you can see we are getting electric. So you can add on more properties and methods even after you actually define your object later. So later in the code you can do it anywhere. So this is one more thing which can be done with objects. Now let's say you want to delete a particular property. Okay, so you realize you don't need the price of this car object anymore. So you can use this delete keyword. I can say delete and I can say car dot price, hit semicolon, and this will delete this price attribute of the car object. So to test it, if I just copy this and if I try to paste it over here, you can see we are getting undefined because we deleted this car property at this line. So if I comment this out, you'll get the price. If I uncomment it, you'll get undefined because there is no property which is named price after this line, after 19th line, right? So this is one more thing that you can do in objects. So one more thing that you can do with objects, because JavaScript is a loosely typed programming language, you can change the data type of these properties on the fly also. So let me just comment this out. So right now we have price as a number type, but you want to have price as a string type. So what you can do is you can say car dot price equal to, and then you can store a string also. Okay, so even then we are getting the output. You can change the output over here. You'll see you can get another value, the updated value. And if you want to check out the data type of this price property, you can wrap this inside type of that we just saw. So now the type of has become string, right? So we've changed the data type of price attribute. Earlier it was a number, but now it is a string. So if I comment this out, you can see we're getting number because here it is a number. If I uncomment this, it becomes a string. So all these things can be dynamically done in the program wherever you want, at the end, at the start, inside the actual definition. And a lot of things are dynamic in nature when it comes to objects in JavaScript.